The Thompson family yearned for a change. They had spent years in the bustling city where the noise never seemed to stop and the crowds were always pressing in. The constant hustle and bustle had worn them down, and they longed for a simpler, quieter life. City life had become too crowded, too noisy. The endless traffic jams, the blaring horns, and the never-ending construction had taken their toll. They missed the tranquility of nature, the sound of birds singing, and the sight of stars in the night sky. They dreamt of peace and quiet, of open spaces and starry nights. They imagined a place where they could breathe freely, where their children could run and play without fear, and where they could find solace in the beauty of the natural world. So when they stumbled upon a listing for a charming, albeit dilapidated farmhouse in the countryside, they felt a glimmer of hope. The house was old and in need of repair, but it had character and potential. It was a place where they could build a new life away from the chaos of the city. It was perfect, or so they thought. The idea of transforming the old farmhouse into their dream home filled them with excitement and determination. They could already see the possibilities, the memories they would create, and the love they would pour into every corner of the house. They pooled their savings and bought the old house. It was a big decision, but they were ready to take the leap. They knew it would be a lot of work, but they were committed to making it their own. It was a fixer-upper, that much was clear. The walls were peeling, the floors creaked, and the roof leaked. But they saw beyond the floors. They saw a home that could be beautiful, a place where they could find peace and happiness. But they were excited to take on the challenge, to make it their own. They spent hours planning the renovations, dreaming about the changes they would make. They envisioned a cozy living room with a fireplace, a kitchen filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals, and bedrooms that would be sanctuaries of rest and relaxation. The house stood on a hill, overlooking rolling fields and a distant forest. The view was breathtaking, and they could already picture themselves sitting on the porch, watching the sunset and listening to the sounds of nature. It seemed idyllic, like something out of a storybook. The charm of the countryside, the beauty of the landscape, and the promise of a fresh start made them feel hopeful and excited about the future. Little did they know their story was about to take a dark turn. The house held secrets, and the land had a history that was not immediately apparent. As they began to settle in, they started to notice strange occurrences, things that couldn't be easily explained. The drive to their new home was filled with anticipation. They talked about their plans for the house, their dreams for the future, and the adventures they would have in their new surroundings. They talked about their plans for the house, their dreams for the future. They imagined the garden they would plant, the animals they might raise, and the community they hoped to become a part of. Their hearts were full of hope and excitement. As they pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house looked both beautiful and eerie in the fading light, and a sense of foreboding settled over them. A sense of foreboding settled over them, a feeling that they couldn't shake. They tried to brush it off, attributing it to the stress of the move and the uncertainty of the future. But deep down, they knew that something was not quite right. They were entering a place with a past. The house had stood for generations, witnessing countless stories, both happy and sad. It had seen love and loss, joy and sorrow, and it held memories that were not easily forgotten. A past shrouded in mystery and sorrow. As they began to uncover the history of the house, they realized that their new home was more than just a building. It was a place with a soul, a place that had been shaped by the lives of those who had come before them. And now, it was their turn to add their story to its legacy. The air was still as they stepped out of the car. The silence was almost unnerving, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The house loomed before them, its windows dark and empty like the eyes of a skull. Dust caked the porch and cobwebs hung from every corner. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay. The only light came from the setting sun, casting long, eerie shadows across the dusty furniture and faded wallpaper. It was clear that the house had been abandoned for years. Yet there was a strange feeling that lingered, a sense that they were not alone. As they explored the house, their initial excitement began to wane. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in the walls, sent shivers down their spines. They tried to ignore the feeling of unease that was creeping in, but it was hard to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The house had an oppressive atmosphere, a heavy silence that seemed to absorb all sound and movement. The Thompsons quickly learned from the villagers that their new home had a tragic past. The whispers were hushed, almost as if speaking too loudly would summon the spirits themselves. The villagers spoke of eerie occurrences and unexplained phenomena that had plagued the house for decades. 50 years ago, a family had lived and died within those walls. The old photograph showed a family that seemed ordinary at first glance, but a closer look revealed the sadness etched into their faces. The father, driven mad by grief after the death of his wife, had taken the lives of his 2 young children before ending his own. His eyes, even in the faded photograph, seemed to follow you, filled with a sorrow that transcended time. The villagers whispered that their spirits still haunted the house, seeking peace or perhaps revenge. The house, with its creaking floors and drafty halls, seemed to breathe with a life of its own, as if it were a living entity mourning the loss of its former inhabitants. At first, the Thompsons dismissed these stories as local folklore. They laughed off the villagers' warnings, attributing them to overactive imaginations and old superstitions. They were a practical family, not prone to flights of fancy. They busied themselves with unpacking and settling into their new home, confident that the tales of ghosts and hauntings were just that, tales. But as the days turned into weeks, strange occurrences began to plague them. The once cozy home started to feel oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on them. Objects moved on their own, doors creaked open and slammed shut without a breeze, and whispers seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. The whispers were faint, almost indistinguishable, but they carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. One evening, as Mrs. Thompson was preparing dinner, she felt a cold spot wash over her. It was as if an icy hand had brushed against her skin, leaving a trail of goosebumps in its wake. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and a shiver ran down her spine. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a shadow. Turning around, she saw a fleeting shadow disappear around the corner. It was quick, almost too quick to be real, but she knew she had seen something. She brushed it off as her imagination, but the feeling of unease lingered. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, each sound a reminder of the unseen presence that seemed to watch her every move. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something unseen and malevolent. The air in the house grew heavier, and the once comforting silence now felt like a suffocating blanket. The Thompsons began to realize that the stories they had dismissed so easily might hold more truth than they had ever imagined. The whispers from the past were not just echoes of a tragic history. They were a living, breathing part of their present, and they were not going to be ignored. As the Thompsons began renovations, they stumbled upon more than just old furniture and dusty boxes. They had expected to find remnants of the past, perhaps some old trinkets or forgotten belongings, but what they discovered was far beyond their wildest imaginations. Hidden beneath the floorboards in the attic, they found a small wooden chest. It was tucked away so carefully that it seemed almost as if someone had wanted it to remain hidden forever. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed letters and faded photographs, was a diary. The letters were brittle with age, and the photographs had faded to a sepia tone, capturing moments long forgotten. It belonged to the former mistress of the house, a woman named Amelia. Her name was inscribed on the cover in elegant flowing script, hinting at a time when penmanship was an art form. The diary entries painted a chilling portrait of the family's final days. Each page was filled with handwritten notes that revealed a descent into darkness and despair. Amelia wrote of strange noises in the night, cold spots, and a growing sense of dread that permeated the house. The once warm and inviting home had become a place of fear and unease. She described her husband's descent into madness, his paranoia and delusions. He had once been a loving and caring man, but something had changed him, something that Amelia couldn't quite understand. Her words were filled with fear and despair, a haunting echo of the tragedy that had unfolded within those walls. She wrote of sleepless nights and a constant feeling of being watched. As the Thompsons read through the diary, the strange occurrences in the house took on a new and terrifying significance. The creaks and groans of the old house were no longer just the sounds of settling wood. They were the whispers of a tormented past. They realized that they weren't just dealing with an old house that creaked and groaned. The very walls seemed to hold the memories of the pain and suffering that had once taken place there. They were living in the aftermath of a tragedy, surrounded by the remnants of a family torn apart by grief and madness. The empty rooms echoed with the silent screams of the past. The house held on to its secrets, secrets that were now being revealed to the Thompsons. Each discovery brought them closer to understanding the true horror that had once gripped the household. But were they ready for the truth? The more they uncovered, the more they realized that some secrets are better left buried. The house had a story to tell, and it was up to the Thompsons to decide if they were willing to listen.